Hi everyone, Beth Lauren Parrish with Inspired Riding. We are back with the interview series, and I'm so excited to introduce you to Tess Wheat with Wheat Saddlery. So thank you so much for being here. Do you want to talk a little bit about where you're from and what you actually do?
Yeah, I am based out of Austin, Texas. I usually cover Texas. Sometimes I go up into Oklahoma, sometimes I go into Louisiana, but basically I'm a saddle fitter. I go out and I assess the fit of saddles, existing saddles, and make recommendations based on what I see as far as the horse and the rider combination. Um, I fix saddles, I do leather work, I flock saddles. I will look at Western saddles and Australian stock saddles. There's just not a lot that you can do to change those types of saddles. So when I'm in a situation like that, I give my best recommendation on what I think will fit you and your horse. So yeah, kind of a general saddle fitting type of experience.
Excellent. And we always love experts like this because I'm always leaning heavily on saddle fitters for my guys. So thank you again for being here.
No worries.
I'm going to start with a fun question. If I
Okay.
handed you $10 million right now, what would be the first thing you would do?
Oh. Wow. I would build my own facility for me. I mean,
Nice.
isn't that the dream? I would build the barn and the house combo with the covered arena and the big ass fans and the mirrors and the specialty footing with the ebb and flow technology so you don't have to have sprinklers and huge pastures with, the dream that every horse person has.
I love that so much. I'm
And
so
then
there with you.
taxes on it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. That's awesome. Yeah, that's one of my dreams.
Oh yeah.
Definitely. So can you tell me about when you first started riding and what that experience was like for you?
My very first time in the saddle was 3 days after I was born. My father was a Western pleasure trainer,
Okay.
and when they brought me home from the hospital, he immediately got on the horse and took me around the neighborhood. So that was my very first time in the saddle.
Wow.
As far as the first time that I can remember, we had this rotten Shetland pony, and it was from our childhood. Was I have two brothers, so our childhood was spent mostly riding around the farm in Mississippi and doing crazy things off of horses and things we probably shouldn't have done. So it's pretty exciting.
That happens a lot with children and horses. So.
Oh yeah. Don't leave them unsupervised. It can get kind of crazy. Yeah.
Totally. That sounds like a lot of fun, a nice way to grow up too.
It was interesting because when you're growing up in a situation like that where you're out on land, you don't realize how much you will miss it once you crave going to the city and doing city things. But when you grow up in a rural setting, it is very wholesome, and you do a lot of things that other people don't do. And then when you're introduced to other people and you're like, wow, you never went swimming in a creek, you never went swimming in a pond, you never jumped off your horse into the pond, you never swam your horse into the pond. Okay, so yeah.
So many
So
different ways to be with your horses. It's really cool though.
yeah, it was a nice way to grow up, and it was very laid a really good foundation. You learn to work hard early. So
Oh, I'm sure.
yeah.
Totally. So have you ever had or have a heart horse? And if so, what made them special?
Um, yes. She passed away a couple of years ago now. Shama was a very stubborn redhead. She was an Arabian, line bred Egyptian, if anybody's interested in bloodlines. Um, a tank of a horse, very stubborn, very hard to get to do anything to put onto your side. In my herd, she was my beta. She was the enforcer. So basically, but once you got her on your side, I mean, you could ride her through anything. So, it was one of those things where it really taught me. She ended up teaching me a lot more than I thought she did. She, in my herd, she was the one that taught the babies to sit tied. You could tie her by a baby, and you would turn your back, and you'd hear a kerfuffle, and you turn back, and everybody's standing pristinely. She would,
Oh, wow.
she was very much, I reprimand everybody. Nobody steps out of line. This is how things are going to go. So yeah, she was the babysitter. She was, and since she's passed, managing the herd has been a lot more difficult.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
She was, and it's always interesting because, she was not my first choice, but she was like, nope, you're my person. You're going to be my person. By God, you're going to be my person.
She chose you, huh?
Yeah. She chose me. I did not choose her, which is a very interesting thing. I mean, you can go into it thinking, oh, I want this, or I want that, or I want the other, but somehow or another, they know what's best for you. So she knew that I needed her, and I desperately needed her. So yeah, she ended up in the herd. It was great.
Beautiful. How long did you have her?
Oh, wow. That I'm not good with dates and numbers. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I had her for years.
Yeah.
Since before we moved to the farm. Since we moved to Austin. So that was like 1999, 1998, somewhere around in there.
Oh, yeah, that's a fair amount of time. Yeah.
I had her a long time. So yeah, it was it's a very fruitful relationship. She was not easy, but yeah.
Well, I had my heart horse was an Arabian gelding, and
Okay.
he was a Polish Arabian, and
Oh yeah.
he was very, very much the regulator. You have to be doing things a certain way as well. So he was like that, but he also had what I call the heart of gold. Like, he took care of little kids, and he would stop if they were off balance or if they were missing a stirrup on the other side, and he'd go, "Hey, take a look."
Yeah, he's like, hello.
But he was a redhead too, so it's kind of neat to hear that you also had one in your heart. So
Oh yeah.
love those Arabians so much.
It's just, yeah, amazing breed. People don't give them enough credit. They're very smart,
Oh yes,
talented.
and fun to ride. Was yours very smooth?
Very smooth. I mean, it was the trot was just amazing. And I have three purebred Arabian mares right now, and all three are unrideable. One is over 30 years old though, so that's kind of the deal there. Then
That's
I have
awesome.
two half warm bloods and two half Arabians. And interestingly enough, even the halves are smooth. The
Nice.
trot is because of the short backs.
Right.
Yeah, because if you have a longer back, you have more momentum, and then it actually the way the horse moves and comes across their back and comes across their loins actually pushes you up and out of the seat. So if you want a smoother trot, you get a shorter backed horse. Sorry.
That makes complete sense why my pony is super smooth for me, because he is very compact, which
Right.
also poses a little bit of trouble because I don't have a child's butt. So finding the right size saddle has been an ongoing saga for me. So yes.
Yeah, and that's always interesting when you go to fit these short-backed horses. I mean, when you go to put a saddle on it, when I go to put a saddle on a short-backed horse, what I do is I tend to fit the horse first.
Right.
So get a saddle that will actually fit within their shoulder and rib cage frame. You also look for a saddle that has a shorter point and has more of a flared point, and where the points are flared out and back a little bit so that you can slide them more up onto the shoulder. If you have a gusset in the front, depending on how long or wide the gusset is, then you can slide the saddle even further on top of the shoulder without impeding the shoulder. The shoulder will rotate underneath the front of the saddle. Then you can actually get a 17 and a half on a 17-inch back. So once you can get a 17 and a half inch frame on a 17-inch back by by cupping the shoulders and by doing some finesse in the back, then in the seat yourself, you can actually take the cantle and tip it out.
Okay.
And then move the knee rolls a little bit forward so you can get another 1/2 inch out of that. So effectively, if you engineer the saddle correctly, you can get an quote unquote 18-inch seat out of a 17.5-inch base tree out of a 17-inch back. So they're just little tweaks that you can do get that, but you have to, it has to be, the problem is when you do little tweaks like that, it has to be something custom. That's a completely custom job.
Yep.
Off the shelf is not going to allow you to do that sort of customization, which is quite sad.
Yeah. And do you do those types of tweaks for people on their saddles, or?
I have before. I was working with a fully custom manufacturer. Unfortunately, with all of the delays and shipping and all of the logistics problems, and we were getting a lot of our leather from, or the company was getting a lot of their leather from Italy. Some of those places, unfortunately, have shut down or they've gone out of business. So, you know, the world situation has really impacted the saddle business. And it was taking, to get a completely custom saddle, it was taking 6 months.
Wow.
So I decided, I made the decision for my business, for me personally, to only deal in new saddles right now, because 6 months to wait for a saddle and then not really knowing you're going to get it is pretty drastic.
Yeah, that's that's holding your breath for way too long.
Yeah. Fortunately, there are a lot of really good saddles out there. You just have to be patient. If you're looking for a saddle, you really have to be patient, because if you have somebody who's looking, who knows what they want for you and your horse combination, you just have to wait until it turns up. And unfortunately, some people are not patient, and that's okay. But fortunately, there are a lot of people that are patient and will allow you to search until you find the saddle made the way that it should be made for you and your horse. You know, fortunately, it doesn't take 6 months, so that's great. But yeah, I mean, you know, it's the saddles are interesting, and it's interesting the way that manufacturers approach how they do it. Most of the saddle, here's a little secret about saddle manufacturers: they're not standardized. None of the sizes are standardized. None of the widths are standardized. Nothing
like women's jeans, right?
Yes, even on a bigger scale, because not only do you have to fit you, you have to fit your horse.
Yes.
So,
makes it tricky.
It can get a little crazy, and you will, you know, once you get into it, it can be very technical. It can be very, you know, there's a lot of, you know, looking at the widths, you know, it just, and people's eyes glaze over, quite frankly. I mean, they really do, because no one wants to know.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
No one really wants to know. They just make it fit, make my horse comfortable, make me comfortable, and then, yeah, come back and fix it when it's broken. Yeah, but nobody really wants to know what's underneath. I mean, it's, you know, except for geeks like me. So
I love that, though. How did you actually get into saddle fitting?
Shama, again, my redhead. I was working for Dell. I worked on their database, on their global sales database, and I worked on their global
Dell computers.
database. Yes.
Oh, okay.
So I was a computer programmer. I was sitting at a desk, and I ended up with her and Jules, which we rescued from California, and she was a short-backed Arabian, and I worked with a saddle fitter to buy a saddle for her, my very first saddle for her, and she just had a fit. Shama was like, I don't like it, nah, nah, nah. And I'm like, but she said it fit. And then I started looking at it, because I'd worked, you know, I'd worked for Texas Instruments, and I had worked for Litton Electro-Optical Systems, and I'd done a lot of technical things. And I started looking at it, and I was like, oh my God, you're right, it doesn't fit. It's, wow, you know. And when you start looking at it with an engineering perspective, you realize that some of the things that saddle manufacturers have told you don't always translate into a good fit for a specific type of horse. Specifically, a low-withered horse with a large round rib cage that is short. Most of the saddles are not made for those types of horses. They're made for a higher withered horse that has a shorter arc to their withers, with a longer rib cage,
Right.
with a slightly more upright shoulder, instead of a shoulder that's a little bit more laid back and will rotate underneath the front of the saddle. So so basically when she was throwing a fit, I decided to start looking into saddle fit, and there we are.
Nice. And what type of saddle did you end up getting for her?
I looked at the Holseboses because at that point they were really well made. They were being made by Ideal in England. And then I ended up looking at a Stephen's Advantage. It was not, at that point, it was not called a Stephen's Advantage. It was the regular Advantage. This was before they split out the line. So it was custom Saddlery.
Okay.
The Advantage was made very much like the Holsebos that fit her. And so that's how I ended up working with custom Saddlery. I had gone back to riding young horses for people on the side while I was still working for Dell. And then custom Saddlery was like, hey, you've been telling people to buy our saddles. Would you like to come and train with us? So I said,
Nice.
sure, why not? So that's
I
how
love
that
that they
ended
reached
up.
out to you. That's so cool.
It was an interesting partnership. I enjoyed it. But manufacturers will change things without telling people that they're going to change things. So, the split from custom was not one that I made lightly when I decided to go to Dresch. But Dresch was a completely custom company that was working, that their saddles were made at Ideal Saddlery in England. Most of the saddle companies that we know of, the brands, are not made by that company. They're made by a manufacturing company in England. So, Ideal is very meticulous, and they're very precise about how they do things. And that is right up my alley. I like precise.
Very important. And it sounds like, the career you had before fit perfectly with getting the saddle fit. Yeah.
Detailed oriented. Yeah.
I love that. So cool. So let me get to the questions from my group members, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Let's see. So Sunshine wanted to know, again, she has a horse with no withers, and she's
Right.
hoping to find a good fit. She's always interested in knowing how to make sure things are comfortable for them just across the board. So I don't know if you want to just kind of go over like some certain things that you usually check for, or if that's too much, or whatever.
Oh, no. Yeah. It's so basically when I go up to a horse and rider combination, I want to look at the current saddle that they have on.
Right.
And then basically when you look at a horse's spine, the top of the spine that we see for the back is the top of the spine is processes. So when you look across the horse's back, you can see a particular arc to their back. Right. Some horses have no arc to their back because they have no withers. Mm-hmm. Some of them have a inverse arc where they're a little croup high, basically. So when I'm looking at a horse, if they're completely flat, no wither, the croup and the wither are about the same height, you end up with a very flat type back. Right. So when you're looking at that, you tend to look for a saddle tree that has a flatter arc to it, so that you have a low head, right, and the cantle doesn't curl up. Mm-hmm. Basically, if you have a high head and a cantle that curls up in the back, then the saddle will rock on this type of horse. It only touches in the middle. So when we flip the saddle up, there's when the English saddles, the panels have something called a machine line in the front. It's where the wool flocking is. There's like a line of stitching there that keeps the wool flocking from migrating up until over the pommel. So basically what happens is you look for the machine line. The machine line shouldn't be above the wither itself. Then you make sure that you have full contact all the way down the back. So usually what happens is I come out, the owner puts the saddle up on the horse, I grimace and I go, okay, so let's talk about the back. Because most saddles are not designed for this type of horse. And so, you know, there's a finite list of saddles that have that type of shape. And most people get hung up on the industry buzzwords like a hook tree or something like that. You know, you can have a saddle that has a lower profile that is not a hook tree, that has shorter points, that will be better for a horse than a hook tree, because the hook tree could possibly have too long a point because you have to take into account the rotation of the shoulder. So that's the trick. There's an inexpensive brand out there called a Thoroughgood, which is what I consider a disposable tree, because if you break it, there's no reason to replace the tree because the tree is going to cost more than the original saddle cost.
Oh my gosh.
That's what I consider a disposable saddle. But they have something called a cob tree, which is lovely. I mean, it's a really nice saddle for a low withered horse. You can, because the points on the tree are short and they're flared out and a little back, and because they do actually give you a nice gusset on the front, you know, you can cozy it up to the shoulders. You can get a good amount of rotation underneath the saddle. It fits them. You will, because you're not able to do a lot of engineering on the panels themselves that come in standard sizes, you will get a little bit of rotation in the saddle, but it's so inexpensive. It's a good jumping off place to go, okay, I know my horse is in pain. Let's get this and let's get the tree to match their spine. So basically my rule of thumb is I match the tree to the spine, because the hard bits should match the hard bits, right?
Yes,
so the tree should match the spine, and then the soft bits, the panels, can be flopped to accommodate the musculature and how the muscles are going to actually end up. You know, because when you're actually looking at a saddle and looking at the underside for the panels, I'm looking to see if I can, to make sure the panels aren't actually generating pinch points on the heads of the muscles. So you want to make sure that the trap is free. You want to make sure the lat's free. You want to make sure that the longissimus doesn't get impinged towards the spine. So if you have if they have a wide spine, then you have to make sure that the panels come out and down from the spine.
Right.
Way too much information. Sorry.
No, this is awesome. I'm like eating it up.
So yeah, I mean, if you're looking at a higher end model, you're going to be looking for like a Tristan, which is a dress Saddlery has a tree called a Tristan. It's a very good tree for horses that have low withers. Some of the Albions will actually have a very nice tree but you have to be careful with Albions, because Albion will do this thing where they actually staple foam to the bottom of their trees to make them flat, instead of actually making the tree itself flat. They'll staple foam to the bottom of the trees.
Oh my gosh.
So, and the foam will actually deform over time. So it can be a little touch and go. You have to actually get in there and figure it out, because that's the other thing about saddle manufacturers. Some saddle manufacturers are not consistent over time as far as how they do their trees. So people will ask me, oh, well, I have a XYZ tree. And I'm like, that's nice. Do you know what year it was made?
Yeah. So until you do the actual surgery, you won't really know, is what you're saying.
Yeah, there's a lot where you actually go into the tree and you're like, I am not sure where this one was manufactured, but it doesn't look like the last one I took apart. Yeah, there's, it's because saddle manufacturing is a business.
Right.
And manufacturing practices and manufacturing facilities change based on how they're doing. Whether they can get the workers, whether they can, actually make it at the cost that they're willing to pay. So you're not always, if you buy a Jane Savoy, from the first year it was manufactured, you're not guaranteed that the last year that it was manufactured that it was going to be the same.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's good to know.
Yeah, there's, it just, you have to have an eye for, and the when you actually look at a saddle, when you're looking at a saddle, the cantle is stapled on as an afterthought. It's not always part of the integrated part of the tree.
Okay.
Cantles are usually attached after the tree is actually made. So basically, when you're going through it, you have to look at the arc of the tree, which is really quite hard when you're looking at a finished product, because the way the skirts are attached to the English saddle and the way the piping is done, it can make it look like it has a higher arc than it really does.
Oh, that's true. Okay.
So you pull the skirt up and actually look and see where your stirrup bar is connected, and you can tell the arc from there.
That's great to know.
Yeah, it's one of the people are always, oh no, my saddle is really curvy, and I come out and I go, no, you just have a really high cantle on your tree. You don't really have a curvy saddle. Or they'll say, oh no, it's really flat, and I'm like, no, you have a really tiny cantle that was laid back, and therefore your seat is very large. But if you look at the top of the tree, then you have a really sharp arc here. So
this is why we call in the experts like you.
Yeah, there's all these little things you have to look for, which is quite crazy. So
totally. Let's see. Kelly also had a similar type horse. She wanted to know if you have any recommendations for no slip saddle pads for English and Western.
No slip saddle pads are, that's a whole can of worms.
Okay.
So basically, if your saddle is slipping, it's a fit problem. Okay. So, if you're looking at, usually saddles will rotate around a horse because they don't have enough on either side. If it's slipping front and back, then it's because the saddle is either too wide or too narrow. Right. The flip side of that is if you have a saddle that is not the correct shape for your horse's back, you can get it sized correctly for their shoulders, the correct width. The problem is if the saddle is too high and steep in the front, it will rotate from side to side. If the points are too long, then the shoulders will actually flip under the saddle and catch the point, and will actually cause the saddle to fishtail diagonally across the back. If the saddle is, there's so many combinations that will happen. So by putting a Band-Aid on it, by getting a non-slip saddle pad, you're not really fixing anything.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yes. So, if your saddle is slipping or rolling, then you should have someone look at it.
Okay.
As far as, therapeutic pads, the Thin Line, interestingly enough, is a very good pad for absorbing concussion. It will actually extend the life of your flocking, and it doesn't actually change the fit of the saddle. So, you can get the Thin Line half pads where you can shim them. The problem with shimming a saddle is that most people will shim towards the very front or towards the very back, and they never really think about what happens underneath their leg. Mm. So when you're shimming a saddle, unless someone has specifically shown you how it will not cause a bridging effect in the middle, you're probably doing more harm than good if you're shimming your saddle. So, I usually don't advocate a lot of padding because it can, in the short term, it looks great, and it has a lot of problems down the road. So, yeah.
That's great to know. Yeah, my next question was, what pads would you recommend? So Thin Lines, I've definitely played with. I like them. Yes. Have you ever used the back on track pads at all?
I have some clients that use the back on tracks. And they're, in Texas in the winter, they're nice. But for, in the summer, because it's so hot here,
It's already too warm.
I tend to
Yeah.
steer people toward just get a cotton pad, please. It gets so, in some parts of Texas, it can be so humid and hot that
Yes.
it just causes more problems.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can cause, fungus problems, and, they get ingrown hairs, and, people, and I'm just like, oh, this is a vet question.
Yep.
I can't fix this.
I do that a lot. I'm like, this is a different expert question. You're gonna have to ask them. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last question from Carrie. She wanted to know your thoughts on living tree saddles. I've never even heard of that, so I'm curious if you know anything
I
about it.
tried to look them up. I couldn't find what she was talking about.
Okay.
If she's a specific manufacturer, that would probably be great. So basically the trees that I'm familiar with that are what I wouldn't consider a standard English tree, like the wow saddles.
Mhm.
They actually have a Y formation, and they flex in the back, and you know, they're an interesting concept. The treeless saddles, they're an interesting concept. Basically, what I find when I go out and I look at saddles that are a non-standard English tree, I find horses that are sore.
Mm.
Um, it is quite interesting to me, because most English trees, when you look at them, they're like, oh, English trees are rigid trees. They're rigid for a reason. The horse's back is in constant motion. Even when they're standing still, they're adjusting their muscles to stand still. So
Right.
their back is constantly moving. When you have a rider in a saddle, regardless of what type of tree is in that, you can have an experienced rider that is balanced, causes less impact on the back than an inexperienced rider that is not balanced. And that's why most disciplines concentrate on getting the rider's balance first.
Yes.
Because even with a well-fitting saddle, if you have an unbalanced rider on top of it, you can cause issues in the back. So most of the trees were developed to be rigid to camouflage an unbalanced rider on a horse. So once you balance the saddle, and then you put the person in the saddle and you watch them ride, you realize their balance issues. The way that I go about it is that I tell them, I'm like, you're sitting off to the right, you're gripping with your left leg, and you can tell all this in the saddle.
Oh,
When I
yes.
get to look at a seat, you can tell how someone's sitting. When you get to look at the panels, you can tell where they're gripping. So you give this information to the person that's riding so that they can work on their balance.
Yes.
Because the more unbalanced you are, the more work I have to do on the saddle. And the more often I have to see you, the more often you pay me.
Yes.
So, which can, for some people, be, they don't want to see their saddle fitter every 3 months. They want to see them once a year, which is great. You have to work on your balance. So basically, when I go out and I look at these trees that are more flexible, treeless saddles, and saddles that are engineered to be a different type of saddle that's more reactive, even the reactor panels, I mean, they don't do nearly as good a job camouflaging an unbalanced rider on the horse's back. So I see more soreness issues there. Now, there is always the exception to the rule,
Right.
but for the most part, I tend to steer away from the newer technology until it's been, really tested out in the marketplace. Because, there's all these great things that come out, and on paper, they look great. You put them on the horse, and the horse is like, no.
No, thank you.
I don't like this.
And they're so clear. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, they vary, and my approach, I fit the horse first. So if I put something on the horse, even though in my heart of hearts, I'm like, this should fit, it should be perfect. Oh my God, this is the perfect thing for you. And the horse is like, yeah, no, not feeling it. I'm like, okay, we'll do something different.
That's good.
We'll
That's
just
good.
take it off and do
You know
something
how to
different.
listen well. So,
Yeah.
so
Well,
important.
in the end, I mean, most of the problem with saddles is they were made for riders. They weren't made for horses.
Mm. Yes, good point.
So yeah, I come up and I have people that are like, oh, I love the saddle. And I'm like, that's great. It doesn't fit your horse. This is why you haven't progressed past training level. This is why you haven't, this is why you're not getting, ribbons in Western pleasure. This is why you're not, this is why your horse is refusing to jump,
Totally.
So, it's amazing when you convert people to fitting the horse, right? And getting the horse comfortable and going well.
Yeah.
It's just inspiring to see how much less work you have to do.
So true.
Begin to enjoy your ride instead of, oh my God, I've got to go out. She's going to make me do circles again. Oh,
Oh, yes.
yeah. So,
And then all of a sudden, when everything feels right, your horse offers you such beautiful, wonderful surprises. Like, I just remember the other day I was out and Pepper just offered me the canter. He goes, here you go, we need this. And I'm like, this feels amazing.
yeah. And it's such a, it's so amazing to me that so few people are like, I just don't have that feeling on my horse. And I'm like, why not? Why aren't they, there's got to be a reason, because they're very giving. I mean, they're
Oh, yes.
so amazing. I mean, they give you their heart, and you should, treasure it every single second that you're in the saddle. And if you're not,
Yeah, totally get
there's
that.
a better way.
So that brings me to another fun question. If you were to write a billboard for the entire horse world to see, what would you write on it?
Oh, for the entire horse world to see, please listen to your horse.
I love it.
I mean, it is, one of the things that when I go out and work on saddles, one of the things I leave people with is they're like, well, I'm like, the rule of thumb is 3 months for me to come back out, but sometimes, it's not always 3 months. And they're like, well, how do I know? I was like, well, your horse will tell you if their saddle needs to be fitted. Once a horse becomes accustomed to a well-fitting saddle, they will let you know that it isn't fit.
Yes.
They're kind of like, hello, mom. By the way, yeah.
Yeah.
So it is interesting and when I talk about my clients, I remember the horses better than I remember the people. So
that's pretty common in our industry. I joke about that. I'll remember your horse's name before yours. I apologize now, but it's starting to get better. Yeah. Yeah.
They're usually very happy to see me. So
I would think so.
Nice.
Like you're the one who helps them feel better and move better.
It's amazing how quick they put that together. Yeah.
I love that. It's so awesome. Tess, is there anything else you wanted to say that I didn't ask you?
No, I probably said way too much. So
oh no, it was beautiful. I really appreciate all your information. I learned a bunch as well. And do you do online consultations, or is it only in person?
I have done some when COVID and when 2020 was rolling around and I wasn't able to travel. I did do some video fittings and some video fittings, and those, interestingly enough, it's really hard for me because I am hands-on.
Sure.
But they went really well. I did have a client that had moved to Sweden, and I did flock her saddle for her off of video, and that went really well as well. So
that's awesome.
yeah. So yeah, I do have a mechanism for that. But in reality, my preferred method is I want to go out. I want to lay my hands on the horse. I want to see the horse.
Sure.
Yeah. That's the easiest way to do it. But
I totally get that. But it's good in case there are people in the group that don't have access to a fitter. Just wanted to put that out there if you are available. So
yeah, and it's just, and basically, it's once you know what you're looking for, it's to me, it's really easy because I'm like, okay, I see the horse's back. This is what's going to fit the horse's back. And then I get 200 emails with things that I'm like, nope, 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 nope. Yes, that's it. That's it.
Wait for the light bulb.
Yeah. Yes.
So good. Well, Tess, I so appreciate your time today. Thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. So if anybody wants to get a hold of Tess, you can find her through her website. It's wheatsaddlery.com.
Yes, ma'am.
Sounds great. And everyone remember to lead with kindness for yourself and for your horse. And may the horse be with you always.